Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Gaia in Age of Mythology Retold. At the moment, according to the statistics of ranked play, Gaia is the second worst major god in Age of Mythology. So I want to talk about her strengths and her weaknesses and exactly why she's not doing so well at the moment. Well, the answer to that is right now, a lot of games are about aggression, they're about mobility, they're about very early map control. And Gaia is just not well suited for that particular playstyle. Like, you look at the gods that are currently dominating multiplayer, you look at Odin, you look at Set, you look at Isis, you look at Poseidon, who's the best overall. You see gods that have a significant amount of capability at dominating the map early on. Gaia is not like that. That is the problem. So she's not well designed for the current meta. Now, obviously, things can and will change going forward. So in a couple of weeks, I imagine things will be different. Once they start releasing balance changes, major balance changes, again, things will be different. So we have to see how that is going to play out. But still, I do think Gaia has potential, but rather the problem is with the way the current meta is and how the Atlanteans fit in that meta. You can say whatever you will about Kronos and Uranus. They do have some tools available, especially Uranus in some ways, and Kronos as well, to deal with that. Well, it's different. So Uranus can handle map control quite well because he can get access to hunts, he can get access to gold mines, risking his citizens, the expensive and slow building citizens of Atlantis, by building sky passages. Because it's creating a situation for an opponent, yeah, they can destroy your sky passage, but you can just evacuate your villagers. So that is one issue if you're dealing with Uranus. Whereas with Kronos, you can just teleport buildings, which makes them very aggressive and able to have a great deal of map control. That is also fairly substantial, and also you can construct buildings 25% faster. Gaia has none of those benefits, and if we look at the Atlantean roster, the issue really lies in Tier 2. Because in Tier 2, all you have are Sinnelleos, which are good against, well, decent against everything, not particularly great against any unit. Then you have anti-cav, Pelties, who are really good against cavalry, but not necessarily good against anything else. So just keep in mind that. And also, if you're dealing with an opponent that has cavalry, you also need to catch up to them, and that can be something of an issue, even with the speed benefits that they can get from the weightless mace with Oceanus, which you're probably going to want to go with Gaia. Terma? Well, Terma are a decent unit, but the problem is they just don't really have the damage, inherent damage, to deal with a lot of enemy soldiers. Their specialty is against ranged soldiers. And Chiroballistas are just too an expensive unit to really utilize fully in H2. So you end up with these kind of problems in H2. Things are much better for the Atlanteans in H3, but suffice to say, having a weak H2 is a significant issue. Now you can say, well, isn't that the same problem that Egyptians do have? Because like the barracks units aren't particularly great. Yes, that is an issue for the Egyptians, but the Egyptians get some very significant benefits to deal with that. I mean, there is a reason Ra is doing very poorly, but you consider Isis's gold benefit, significant early gold benefit, her protection from god powers. You consider Set's ability to get hunted animals to his base, his scouting benefit, and you compare that to what any of the Atlantean gods do have. So it's not just a question of like having a weak tier 2. Though, to be fair, you can recruit axemen, slingers, and spearmen, and they'll do their role. It's just, you know, you're much better off as the Egyptians trying to get to tier 3 as quickly as possible, if you possibly can. But you can do so as the Egyptians better, far better than anyone else pretty much, because all you really need is just the food and the gold. You don't have to worry about much wood at all if you're playing the Egyptians in the early game, because your buildings don't require wood. Yes, you do need wood for certain upgrades, but not really huge quantities. That is a very different situation than what the Atlanteans are dealing with, because they do need wood, quite a bit of it in point of fact. So that is one of the inherent issues that Atlanteans do have. And then another issue that's really hurting Gaia is her minor god selection, specifically her tier 2 minor god selection. So you have Oceanus, who's a pretty good god, but he's a support god. He gives you a healer, gives you benefits for Murmillos, Fanatics, and Catapultes, and as well as reducing the cost of promoting our infantry to heroes, though not the duration. But Leto is just useless. And if you know an opponent is always going to go for the same thing, because like going with Leto is just screwing you over in a lot of ways. If you know your opponent, in the vast majority of cases, is going to go for one particular minor god, that makes your opponent predictable. And that is one of the issues as well with Gaia, that people know what you're going to go for if you're playing Gaia, what kind of god, and you can counter that. I mean, you can say whatever you will about, like, oh, Poseidon wants to go Hermes. He doesn't have to always go Hermes. He has that flexibility because Ares is pretty good as a god, as a minor god, whereas Leto is just really pathetic. Then you have the issue of Thea versus Rhea. Now, that's not as big of a problem. Like, Rhea does give you some substantial benefits as well, but is far more situational than what you have with Thea, because, you know, Dryad, Stemphilian Bird, again, more predictability as well with that. So if your opponent knows what you're going to do, that makes it easier from my perspective to form a plan around that. Now, let's talk about Gaia's benefits. So she starts with hero citizens, and promoting citizens to heroes costs minus 25%. Now, this sounds like a great benefit in theory, and even in practice, but here's the problem. You do start with those two hero citizens, and they gather 10% faster. That is a nice, solid early game economic benefit compared to Kronos and Uranus. You also get a fairly substantial wood benefit with Gaia Forest. Gaia Forest give you 5% wood, but that is a pretty substantial benefit, not just because you gather wood faster than other people, but also because it forms defensive lines around your base. Now, the reason this doesn't work is your initial base is not good enough. You can't just play a game where you're just focusing on your initial base. If you try and do that, you will lose. You need extra gold mines. You need hunts. You need relics. If you'll just let the opponent control the map, that is going to bite you in the ass. So that is one of the problems with Gaia. And as for the hero citizens, you might think that's a substantial benefit. And don't get me wrong, it is in a long game. But in an early game, not quite as much, because Uranus and Kronos have access to Prometheus. Like, if you're going Kronos, you're certainly going to get Prometheus. And here's the thing, Valor is a very cheap ability to use early on, and it's best to use it on your citizens. You can use it on your units if you need to deal with certain enemy myth units, to be sure, but in general, you can use Valor. So a lot of, like, the early game benefits you might have with Gaia's inherent major god benefits are negated by her lack of Prometheus, as opposed to what Uranus and Kronos do have. So that is another downside that she's dealing with. Now, economic guild upgrades cost minus 35% and can be researched and aged early. Pretty solid benefit, can really help you out. But again, it's in a longer game. Though don't get me wrong, having access to, say, tier 3 upgrades in tier 2 is not something to laugh at. Having access to tier 4 upgrades in tier 3 is also not something to laugh at. So that is undeniable. But the way I look at Gaia, when I consider her benefits, like, oh, Lush heals friendly units and buildings, and you also have an upgrade that gives you 15% movement speed. Well, that's a great benefit in a longer game, because you can get Lush from town centers, manors, economic guilds, and you can just basically create Lush all around the map from which you can benefit in terms of regeneration and speed. But again, it's not an early game benefit, it's a long-term benefit. And that is what really hurts her. So she has a bunch of benefits that would actually work out if games weren't around 16 minutes or so on average. You look at the statistics of online play, And you see again and again and again that the vast overwhelming majority of games are less than 20 minutes. And 20 minutes is actually long. Like if you were to look at someone's games on the statistics, I have linked the website in the description. But if you look at the top players, if you look at lower level players, you do see that consistently across the board, that the vast majority of games right now, especially with people who know what they're doing, are shorter games. And consider that it takes like 3-4 minutes at least to get to H2, then several more minutes to get to H3, construction, building construction, unit construction, all that. So you end up in a situation where where building across the map, building a lot of town centers, really taking advantage of this is unlikely to happen. On the flip side, and this is one of the significant benefits that I do see with Gaia, on the flip side, if the meta were to change, if people were able to deal with the early rush, if the developers change certain things in terms of balancing, Gaia can end up dominant. And the reason I say that is she's basically a Zerg in Age of Mythology Retold. And why do I say that? Because that's what Lush does. It's like it gives you movement speed, it gives you regeneration for your units. So if we were having longer games, if we could expand across the map, if the current meta wasn't like everyone trying to outrush each other, and if people were building structures around the map, Gaia would be in a stronger position. She has the tools necessary to do so. Well, minus Leto as a minor god, sure. She does, but she does have the tools for more solid long-term experience, because she could have that movement range around the map, which would give her substantial benefits. But because of the way the meta currently works, it's not particularly great for her to deal with. So I would say right now, Gaia for 1v1 is not in a great position, but she could be. Like the strengths are for long-term games, but they don't work out for short-term games, which a lot of 1v1s are. In team games, however, I would say Gaia, however, is fantastic, but keep in mind, you don't have an offensive myth unit in H2 because, yeah, automatons are not great. You don't have that working for you in H2, so that is a problem that you are going to have to contend with as you are playing as her in the game. And that is a problem, believe it or not. Like not having any good offensive units. Say what you will about Prometheans, they are actually pretty solid units, especially like with Alluvian Clay. They can get the job done. And, talking about hero citizens, well, suddenly that 10% gather rate that they get ends up being irrelevant if, Prometheus has Theft of Fire, which gives you a 20% extra benefit to hero citizens. So while she might get them cheaper, they're not actually the best hero citizens in the game. So even from that perspective, and you do want to use at least some of those valors, if not a lot of those valors, on citizens, because the economic benefit with Theft of Fire can be pretty damn substantial. Unlike what Gaia has to say. I think she would be in a very, very different situation if she did have Valor. And if she did have Theft of Fire, then we'd be talking about a completely different meta, but she doesn't. Some people have talked about like the idea, maybe things would be better if we had, all the minor gods available to every single major god. Maybe. Though that would just make some minor gods completely irrelevant as well. Because, like, you consider Tyr, you consider Leto, for instance. So it is a question like, how do you rebalance that? But, maybe that is a discussion to be had about the minor gods. That's all I had to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.